Community.
Community.
Community is...
What's it mean to have community?
I don't even know. Community is such a hard word now.
It needs to be a place where people don't have to wear a mask, don't have to pretend. There's a place where you experience life with one another and know you're accepted.
Man, it is hard to define, isn't it?
We need community.
If you're not known, you cannot be loved.
But we're definitely coming at this from different places.
Welcome. I'm Daniel Powell, and this is the Grounded Presence Podcast, where together we're exploring a deeply rooted existence. This is the second episode of the second season, and it's a full season devoted to exploring community in our modern lives. Today I have a conversation for you with a man named Rusty Gates. Now, I'm not really a church guy anymore, but it is what formed my ideas about community. And Rusty was a minister at a small church in Denver, Colorado that held some of the richest experiences of community in both of our lives. It was a really special season of life, and we're going to reflect on what we learned about community during that time and some of the lessons that we've learned since. And a note before we begin, this conversation was recorded pre-COVID, so our dialogue doesn't reflect the most current state of things right now. And additionally, I've divided up our conversation into 2 episodes. We really covered a lot, so I just split it up into 2 segments to let everything breathe a little bit for you. So without any further ado, here's me and the fantastic, enthusiastic extrovert known as Rusty Gates. So yeah, man, it's good to have you here talking about community.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
We met like 6 years ago out in Denver, and I always just appreciated your just energy that you bring to everything that you're a part of. You just love people, and that's apparent in every interaction I've had with you.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, I've always been that way. I think some of it is upbringing, but I think a lot of it is just hardwired for me to be a kind of an extreme extrovert and to have very few filters, or it just takes a lot to embarrass me. I remember I started a new job a while back, and I was just being myself, which is usually ridiculous. And one of my coworkers, who is a little more timid, a little more shy, she was like, "You don't get embarrassed easily, do you?" And I don't think that it was a compliment. I think she was just like, "You're kind of crazy." And yeah, I was just like, "Yeah, like this is who I am." Like, I don't know. I used to be ashamed of it, but now I've just kind of embraced it's going to be ridiculous, and I'm okay with that. My wife's okay with it, so that's really all that matters.
Yeah, I'm learning that more slowly. I'm glad that you have enough of that for the both of us.
Yeah, man.
So when I first met you, you were on staff at this small, vibrant community church in Denver. And man, that was a special place in my life. How long were you on staff there? Like couple, 3 years?
I think about 4 years. So on staff, maybe 3. I came in June of 2010 and really jumped all in. So I showed up and I said, "Hey, I love this. Like, I want to be a part of this, whatever that looks like." Showed up on a Sunday, and then went to, I think, like our first little house church on Tuesday. And then the following Tuesday, I led house church. And so like I was just all in, man. Like I loved it. I think about that time all of the time. It was lightning in a bottle, and it was special, dude. Like, yeah, when I set out to go into ministry and said, "This is what I want to do," I had all these big aspirations, and so many of those things came to fruition at Bloom. It was a dream job, and I treasure the time I got to spend there.
That's awesome. Like that's kind of how I got roped into the whole thing too. I went out one night and I met Jules.
Yeah.
I went out drinking and dancing by myself, and next thing I know, I made a new friend, and I'm at a house church group.
Yeah.
It's like that's not the way things normally go, But
no, that's
anyway.
so fascinating. I mean, I didn't know any of that. Like when you're in leadership, you're kind of aware just people show up, and there's so many relationships you can't keep track of all of them. So when they show up, you kind of try to do your best to get connected and get to know people, but it's a little bit impossible, which is why for us in that community, what we were trying to create was like a community of leaders. We didn't want it to be all about like us on quote unquote staff, because it's impossible. There's just no way that at that time, like what, three of us could manage 400 plus relationships. So we were always kind of pushing that out to the people and saying, hey, listen, like this is like our job is kind of to facilitate this thing, but it's your job to be the community. Like, so it's cool to hear how you kind of got roped into the community, I guess, if you will.
I don't know. I kind of have trouble calling that place church,
Yeah.
because I feel like church carries this weight of like seeking for answers, and what I experienced there was just this group of people collectively exploring like what it looks like to live a good life,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, we were constantly, I don't know, it was really interesting because we were constantly pushing against all of these experiences we had had previously, while at the same time trying to reclaim so much of what we had seen in church and experienced in church and looked at throughout the history of church, and trying to reclaim that and said, we are going to be different. A lot, and I think a lot of people would agree with you to say this wasn't like typical church. And yet, like our gatherings, our times together, they were very liturgical. And one of the things we were constantly saying is like, this is supposed to be different, right? Like this is supposed to be different from our day-to-day lives. It's supposed to be a break from the monotony of the grind. And if people show up here and it's all the same as the rest of their life, like what's the point? It, again, like I say, like lightning in a bottle, man. Like I stay in touch with one of the guys who was on staff with me, Aaron, and we talk a lot about that time of just how special it was and how all of these elements came together for these few years to create something magical. And I know that it's still going on. Like I know that community in some form still exists, but it's such a, from what I understand, it's just not what it was, and that's okay. Like that's not a bad thing. I'm not judging them. I'm just saying that like what we had in that moment in that season was just really special.
Hearing you talk about that, it kind of makes me peel it back a little further. It's like talking about that liturgical element to it. I guess the direction that liturgical energy took you was to like calm yourself enough to be relationally open.
Yeah.
Instead of like calming you to be open to information,
Yeah. Well,
anyway.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things we were constantly talking about with our leaders, and then also as our role as, I guess, leaders and pastors of this community, shepherds, if you will, was that like our job wasn't to necessarily teach, our job wasn't necessarily to change people, our job wasn't any of those things. Like our job and the job of all of our leaders that we brought into that, the job was to create a space for people, just a space for people to be and exist and go through these rhythms, and in through that encounter something bigger than themselves, encounter truth. And we worked really hard to let go of any kind of pressure to try to cause a certain type of result, right? Like I think that a lot of church leaders, and I've been this guy, we say, oh, we're going to say these things, do these things, and then people will start being like this. And I think we kind of, we were less concerned with the being like this part. We just thought like, that's not our responsibility. We can't force somebody to change. We can't force somebody to be something they're not. But what we can do is create a space for them where they'll feel loved and welcome, where they'll experience truth about themselves, truth about the world that offers hope. And through that, maybe something will change. And if it does, great. And if not, like, it's not our problem.
What really makes me smile hearing you talk about the other end of it, and like how that was such a special time in your life too. That's really cool.
Yeah, man. I don't like, it's funny. Even in the moment while we were there, right? In the moment, it's so hard to see what's happening. We knew some, I mean, you kind of knew it was cool to be a part of. We knew we were doing some fun stuff. We really enjoyed it, but it wasn't till we got that hindsight that we started to see, wow, like that was really important. Because I mean, when I think back to that time, I was in my early to mid 20s. Like I was a child. And I knew nothing about the world, like very Jon Snow-esque. Like I knew nothing. I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. My whole life had basically spent in church world. So I didn't really know much about the world outside of church. I felt extreme anxiety about what we were doing in that time. I was constantly anxious and worried about like, am I doing anything that matters? Is this actually beneficial? Do I belong
no
here?
way.
Am I a fraud? Like, yeah. And then in retrospect, two things happened, right? So then we leave Bloom. My wife and I, we moved to Houston because that's where her family is from. And I had like no plans when I came down here. she had a job offer that we couldn't pass up, so we moved. We knew we wanted to be near her family. And so I was like, I probably spent like 2 months playing Call of Duty. I was like, all right, well, I'll just do this for a while. And so I had like no plan, but there was a certain sense of relief in the sense of, okay, now I'm not performing anymore. Like all that anxiety I felt around leading this community immediately was gone, because now there was no more like imposter syndrome. There was no more, because like no one was looking to me. So there was immediately a certain sense of relief. However, that was immediately coupled with a certain helplessness or anxiety around being irrelevant. Because so like in Denver, like again, we were a small community. I think at our most, like with people showing up, if everybody showed up that were kind of tangentially related to our community, maybe there's 500 people.
That's also like huge growth, because I went there for 2 years and it grew from probably like 70 people to 300, 400, 500. You know?
Yeah, totally. So. And there was a lot of growth, but relatively, it was a small community. Like it wasn't this massive megachurch. And yet, because of my position on staff, I don't know if there's a good way to say this, but I was kind of like locally famous. So like I would regularly run into people I know all over the city because I was in this place of kind of prominence. And then also being on staff opened doors to me. So I was meeting with all these different pastors and leaders across Denver. I was speaking at other churches by the time that I left. And so like right as I was leaving, I was kind of stepping up into this like what I thought I was always going to do, which was going to be this pastor and be a little bit well known. And so then we moved to Houston. I'm not speaking at churches. I'm not even doing church work. We basically stopped going to church. And it was just like, it was such a 180, like from being like my identity being wrapped up in being a pastor and being a leader of this community to moving to a city that where I know no one other than my wife and her family, where the religious climate was drastically different from where I had been. So, I mean, it's a heavily Baptistic, non-denominational Bible church kind of environment. And so to talk about liturgy and house churches, like there just wasn't a context for that down here for most communities. And so immediately we were lost. And then the reason I talk about all of that is we moved down here and then I'm lost and don't even know where faith and church fits in my life anymore. But then after we spent about 18 months kind of being lost. And after that 18 months, we landed in a faith community and we had like really hardened hearts and we'd really like all of these walls up against community, against church. And they started breaking down. And the things that started breaking them down were like really simple things. Were like the leaders of our community remembering our names and coming up to us and giving us a hug every week and saying like, Rusty, Jess, it's so good to see you. How are you? We're glad you're here. And like really simple things like that. But honestly, like that changed everything for us. And like it started breaking down the walls and we started kind of entering faith community and what that looked like and what that meant. And what that did is it actually really changed my own attitude towards my time and my work at Bloom. Because I remember like one of the things I did really well is I would run across our little gathering space to give people hugs. Like I'd be like, hi, I know you. I'm so glad to see you. I'm glad you're here. And it just gave me a lot of like encouragement that, oh yeah, like what you were doing was mattered. Like, sure, I was a kid. Sure, I didn't know anything about the world. Sure, there are all these things that I could stack against myself of why I wasn't a great leader at Bloom. But then I look back and say, no, but I did some good things. And I think that really helped some people.
Well, I just want to say this, that energy, that energy that you're talking about, I think it ruined church for me.
Oh, no.
In the best way. What that time did in my life was it made me realize like, oh, like I'm not really looking for like necessarily a place to believe the same things as the people around me. I'm just looking for a place where somebody wants me there,
Yeah.
And oh man, like just remembering people's names, that's so huge, And something else that came out of that season that I've realized was so special to me was the art of the specific invitation.
Yeah.
Because people were always just very organically inviting you to do things, you know?
Hmm.
But then, it's like I got out of that, started getting back into like the normal church scene.
Yeah.
And yeah, I remember this one interaction that happened in the past year or so, but I was standing talking to, I think the music director or something, at this
Yeah.
one church, and this older man and his wife walk up to him and they start talking, right? So it's kind of that thing where it's like, oh, should I be in the conversation?
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe you don't experience that as an extrovert, but
I get it.
but anyways,
Yeah.
they started talking about like going out to dinner together,
Yeah.
I'm like, hi, I've been here twice. It's kind of like I got edged out of the conversation when they started
no.
talking about like their, I'll call it clique for lack of a better word, but like cliquish plans,
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh man, that's like the art of community right there, is
Yeah.
seeing somebody that's new and being like, you come to this, you will come to this, you don't have a say in it.
Well, and I don't want to like, yes, some of that was us. Like, I'll take some responsibility that, like, as a community, I think we were really good about that. And there was this natural, yeah, like you said, like organic understanding that people just need people and we can be those people. But even when I was there at Bloom, towards the end of it, we'd get a lot of calls, or I'd connect with a lot of pastors all over the country who were really interested in what we were doing, our house church model and our community, because it just seemed like it was working and something special was happening. And so they'd hear about it one way or another, and then they'd want to connect, and they'd talk to me because I was leading those house churches. And one of the things that I was constantly telling people is that, like, I'm going to share everything that we have. Like, I'm not going to hold anything back. Here's all the tools. Here's all the resources. Here's the philosophy. Here's how we're like the tone that we're using when we say these words. But I would always offer the caveat of, I still don't know that this is going to work in your community. And it's not because you can't pull off what we pulled off. I think we were fine. We were adequate at our jobs. But a part of it was the city of Denver at that time, right? So the joke that I heard a lot while we were there is that nobody in Denver was from Denver. And I think we never ran these metrics, but shooting from the hip, I would say 80% of our community was transplants, people who had moved from somewhere else to Denver. And even and across age demographics, like, it wasn't just the young 20 somethings, there were plenty of that. But we had like older communities and older members who had moved from Kansas or moved from Iowa or moved from Ohio and somehow just were seeking community. And one of the things that I found moving back to Houston, moving back to Texas, is that down here, like, again, Denver is just such a transient city. Down here, most cities, people are just here. Like, they might move from a suburb to the city or from the city to a suburb, but they're all like the percentage of people who are from Houston that stay in Houston is so much higher than it is people who are from Denver that stay in Denver. And so I don't know. I think it's just one of those things that when I talk about like the religious climate of Houston, that's a part of it. It's, yes, it's Baptistic, but it's also just like the culture of the city, which impacts community.
You using this term lightning in a bottle that I've heard you say a few
Yeah.
times. It's like, yeah, you get all these transient people. People are either running away from something, running to something.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? And likely it's just like one little stepping stone on their journey. And it's like, that just creates this electric platform where
Yeah.
so much cool stuff happens.
Well, and we were all
Yeah.
seeking. When you say that, like, yeah, there were so many people who were there because they were running from their childhood home or their upbringing, and they wanted to do something different and be their own person, or they were running to the promise of a new life or whatever. And so you naturally had this energy of, hey, we're all seeking something, and we'll admit that. But what I found, and again, I spent a lot of time in the South, so I feel like maybe that's what I can speak to the best. In the South, a lot of people are just like, oh no, like, I'm good. I went to college, I got the job, I got married, I got the kids, and now I'm just making it. Right. And so what people are seeking and the messages that they need to hear are very different than what we were all seeking when we were different. I mean, when did you leave Denver?
Just this past June.
Okay, so not too long ago. Have you been back
Yeah.
since then?
No.
See, I'd be fascinated what it feels like when you go back, because I remember going back pretty quickly. I know I performed a wedding for some of the people in our community, and even like 6 months later, I was like, this is a different city. Like, it's not the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know like how you look at it when you go back.
Yeah. You know, the thing I miss the most is those alpine meadows.
Yeah,
That's, yeah,
you guys got out there.
sitting in an alpine meadow on a backpacking trip alone. That's when I feel my identity, you know?
Dude,
Oh,
see,
I miss
this is,
that. I miss
you know,
that.
I know you talk about like my extroversion. See, like to me, I want to do that. Like the idea of that sounds like so romantic to me, and I go, oh man, that'd be so cool. I'd love to do that. But the reality is, I never did any of that when I was in Denver. I think I went on one camping trip. But for me, what I miss about Denver is the weather, specifically in regards to the fact that you can just be outside. Again, that's another reason why I think that Denver has such a unique um, community aspect, is because it is so beautiful so often. There's really good public transportation, so you can kind of just get around without having to drive forever. And so, like, there's a microbrewery on every corner because, like, it's beautiful and people will walk. That doesn't work here in Houston because nobody's walking anywhere. You have to drive, and it's so hot. You can't just walk for 10 minutes or you'll be soaking wet in sweat. So everybody has to drive. But I miss Denver for the community and the people of it. The mountains are great. I love the mountains, but like I could take it or leave it if I could recreate the communal aspect of the city.
Well, hey, I want to go back to that introvert extrovert thing you just touched on there.
Yeah.
This is interesting because I think what I experience when I'm alone in an alpine meadow with nobody for 5 miles around, I think that might be what you experience in your extroversion. Because here,
Yeah.
when I'm in an alpine meadow, I'm just wrapped up in the flow of that moment. I am so like I observe myself so much in every situation that's the only time I'm like free from the observation of myself. Does that make sense to you at all?
Yeah. And that, so you're saying like when you're in the social context, you're more like a kind of focusing or critical of yourself, and you're paying attention to what you're doing and saying and what they're doing and saying. And so when you get out to nature, you're just free of all that.
Yeah. Do you experience that like maybe a similar flow as an extrovert around people?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, like, I think it's not that I'm not constantly critiquing my behavior or my saying or what you're saying. I think that that work comes more naturally to me, and I'm not afraid of it. Again, like, work doesn't feel like work if you're made to do it. So I really enjoy criticism might be the wrong word, but the analysis of a social situation is fun to me. I really enjoy being like, what makes this person tick? What will make them smile? What do they want out of this moment? Can I give that to them? And playing the game. And I mean, so now I'm in real estate, and it feels like, I think a lot of people get like, well, that's a weird transition, and yet so much of what I've done in church world translates to this because most people just want to be heard and they want to be cared for. And when people are moving, it's always a season of transition. So I get to kind of step in and help them in those seasons of transition. But still, it always just comes down to, what does this person want? What do they need? What will it take for them to feel heard and cared for? Some people want me to hear about their feelings, and some people don't ever want to share their feelings ever. And so, yeah, I think in those social settings, I love it because it's just a game. I had some friends that hired me. They had a gaming company, like a video game company. It was like a software, like adjacent thing. It was really interesting. But they would go to these video game conferences. But they were all a bunch of introverts because they were like coders and engineers who were building this software, and they needed somebody who could just like stand in a crowd and be ridiculous and get people to come in and talk to them about their software. And so they paid me, I think, for 3 or 4 different conferences, flew me out to Boston a couple times to just like be an extrovert for their company,
The hype man.
a hype man. And I can't tell you how much I loved it. Like, it was exhausting because it was just long days and it was a lot of people. But to go in there and just like, how can I, and right, like a lot of the people at these gaming conventions are introverts, but they're all there seeking community. They're like, hey, we're all here for this shared interest. And so like it would just be a game of like, how can I connect with these people? How can I walk up to a stranger and make their day? And by making their day, I will of course earn the right to talk to them about what we're doing. So I love it, man. Yeah, that long rambly answer, and
No, that's
also
great.
as an extrovert, it's always going to be a long rambly answer. And like, if you're going to ask me a yes or no question, and it'll take me 20 minutes to answer it.
See, I can do that. I can get to that space of like observing somebody else and trying to like speak to them if I've been in the Alpine Meadow for 3 days. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the Alpine Meadows for 3 days would kill me.
Yeah?
Yeah, man. I went to the Grand Canyon by myself right at the end of college, and I went on this like 3,000-mile road trip by myself. And I remember sitting like on the edge of the Grand Canyon, like my feet dangling over. And I was like, I literally told myself, you have to sit here for 15 minutes. You have to, because like supposedly this is a big deal. You need to sit here for 15 minutes and try to feel something. And I sat there for 15 minutes and was like, I don't feel anything. I'm going to Vegas. So I got in my car and drove to Vegas, and I spent like the next day or so in Vegas, where I was sitting at like poker tables, meeting people and hearing their stories and playing a game with them, which like that was so much more life-giving to me than sitting at the Grand Canyon.
So, how do you define community? If you can put a couple of sentences to that, what is community to you?
I think you asked me like a yes or no question, and again, 20 minutes. So a couple sentences is like the biggest challenge of my life. I think community is, let's see, I'm going to try not to overthink it, because I want it to be, my answer to be profound, but I think community is,
How about let's take an easier way? When's the last time you experienced community?
Yeah, I think, well, I'll say this. I'll give you two answers because that's what it is. The first answer was, so this last Wednesday was Ash Wednesday, and my relationship with our church has been really interesting because I have all this ministry experience, but I haven't sought a position on staff. And there are times when I go, man, I really have all this to offer and I want to offer it, but I don't know what that looks like, especially because I, you know, don't want to sign up for being a full-time staff member right now. And yet one of the staff members knows about my background, and we've been really close, and we've talked a little bit about kind of that instinct to me where it's like, hey man, like I want to offer some of this experience I have, but I don't know what that looks like, or I don't know how to make that work. And like recently he just like was like, hey man, we've got this Ash Wednesday service coming up. Will you write a benediction for us? And so like I wrote something and I was like, okay, like I kind of like this, but I don't know if they're going to want to use it or what. And so I sent it to him and said, you don't have to use this. Here you go. But there's something. And then I was sitting there, and then like our lead pastor is kind of famous in Christian circles, which I almost like kind of don't like, because it feels like people are like, oh, you ended up there because you have like a famous pastor. It's like, that's not why I ended up there. But it's like he's kind of a big deal, and but at the same time he's like done a really good job of making himself available and all that. But he only had one part in the whole service because there were a lot of other members who were leading the service. So he had one part in the service, and it was the benediction. And so he gets up and then he reads the benediction I wrote, and it like brought tears to my eyes, because like I just was like, I have a place here, right? Like I got to be a part of this, and I didn't have to be on staff and I have to jump through all these hoops. There were just people here that knew me, that knew I had something to offer, and invited me to offer that thing. And then it became so much more, right? Because then the lead pastor reads it, and he reads it beautifully and with conviction and power. And so what I wrote was elevated to a level that I didn't really expect it to be. Like it was just so much better, and it was so rich. And I like, obviously it was a part of this service that really shaped this community. And so that was like probably in my mind, like one of the big ways, like in church world, that I really felt that, because somebody made a space for me and they said, hey, offer what you have to offer. And that was really cool. And then in more simple ways, like we have some really good friends that have kind of become our people, which again, like we have had those people throughout our lives in different seasons, and they've kind of changed as we've moved. But we have like a regular game night, and and not only that, so they're kind of newlyweds. They've been married for a year and some change maybe. and they ended up just buying a house like right next to ours, like 900 yards from ours, like maybe a 3-minute drive in a car. And so now like we just like get together every week and we hang out and we play board games. And some nights one of us will be in a bad mood, or all of us will be in a bad mood, or we'll be in a great mood, and we'll just play games and drink and hang out. And again, a little bit of lightning in the bottle, because we've gone years without having that kind of relationship. We've gone years without having those people. But right now, we're just in a season where we're really, really fortunate to have those people who we rely on them and they rely on us. And I'll say this, like, it's been a hard road getting here. Like, those relationships have gone through some ups and downs, and we've had to kind of redefine the relationship several times. And we've had conflict, and through that, all of that kind of messiness, like we've found a really good rhythm and a really, really good deep friendship.
That's beautiful, man. I'm really happy
Thanks, dude.
for you. That's great.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's a good season. Like, there's not everything's perfect by any means, but we're really, really fortunate. Dare I say, blessed. And yeah, our kids, like, we love them, and as much of a challenge it is to parent two boys, that's good. Like, we're so fortunate. And I usually talk to Jess about this. Like, this is a really weird way to look at it, but I promise that I'm an optimist. I'll just say, like, to Jess, my wife, I'll say, like, things are so good today. Like, they really are. Like, they're really good. We have friendship, we have our health, we have, like, we're paying our bills, which isn't always true, but like right now we're paying our bills. Things are so good. And if we continue to live, like we continue to live longer, we have so much pain and tragedy ahead of us. Like, unfathomable tragedy in front of us. If only we live long enough. And the reason I say that is, let's soak up today and remember that there are good days. Because I just know, like, not that the other shoe will drop, but I just know that the world is a hard, broken place, and we will experience the loss of parents. We will experience the loss of friends. God forbid, like other harder tragedies, like cancer and sickness and illness and financial woes. Like, there's just a lot of stuff that we're not immune to. And even though we may not be experiencing it right now, I'm constantly trying to remind all of us as a family that, like, hey, like, we might not always have this, so let's be grateful for it today, so that, like, when those hard times come, we'll remember that there are good times both behind us and ahead of us.
Love it. That's awesome.
Thanks, man. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. It's again, like, I feel like an optimist, but it's so much of. I mean, I don't know how much you've gotten into the Enneagram stuff, but just as, like, as a hardcore 7 enthusiast, like, so much of my life is about pursuing pleasure and avoiding pain. And naturally, I also have a hard time really embracing pain and suffering. So, like, I'm already trying to say, like, okay, the hard days are going to come, but they're still going to be good. It's there's two sides to that coin. Like, that's a really big gift in some ways, but it also can be a really big challenge, and can be detrimental at
Yeah.
times.
No, I was just listening to Rob Bell's podcast,
Yeah.
but he was talking about how he's the kind of guy that can flip everything. It was like, the house is burning, I'll get the marshmallows.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Totally. I've heard him say that, and I empathize with that in my bones. Like, it'll be fine. We'll be fine. We'll figure it out.
But on the tail of that, he was also saying, yeah, people need somebody to just sit with them too. Like, they don't trust you to get the marshmallows unless you can sit with them and say, yeah, that really sucks that the house is burning.
Yeah. Yeah. It's probably, I'd say, out of, like, all the most meaningful things I've probably done in community, I think people would always will remember, like, the big rah rah rah, but I think the people who would look back and say, like, man, Rusty really, like, in that moment stepped up. It was silence. It was being there, just being present and saying, like, I'm here and I'm not going anywhere, and that is what it is. And again, I think that maybe ties into my persistence of, like, consistency, but I think just showing up and saying, like, yeah, I'm going to be here. If I'm going to go back and answer a question that you asked a long time ago about, like, what is community, I'd say it's people that have decided to show up and decided to stick around. And so, like, for me, I have a couple of friendships in Denver that I don't see them very often. I maybe see them once a year, maybe once every other year, but I'm committed. Like, I'm in it. And so, like, I'll text them and I'll just say, like, "Hey, hope you're doing well. Hey, how's it going? Hey, what's this?" It's that commitment to showing up and sticking around. And I wish I could, do this with everybody, and I try to do it to some degree. And I honestly love the internet. I love social media because it allows me to do that at a micro level, where I can kind of stay in touch with people where it doesn't take a lot of energy or time outside of the relationships that are currently in front of me. But like it's just I have people that I've committed to saying like I'm sticking around, like I'm staying in this relationship, even if we're not together, even if we don't get to hang out, even if we don't get to talk. I'm committed to you, and I want to see this relationship continue. That's my definition.
Well, I hope you dug it, and if you did, the conversation will continue on the next episode. And as you're waiting for the next episode, I've got a question for you. What does community mean to you? I'd love to hear your thoughts and your experiences with it. And you can share those with me by dropping a voicemail at 720-744-2587. And if you do that, you might even hear your voice on a future episode of the show. Well, stay safe out there, and I will see you right back here in 2 weeks.